Hi, everybody. Let's talk about mammals on the move. This is a PowerPoint that will talk to you about how animals get around. It'll talk a little bit about their foot structure as well as other ways that they get going. I do want to point out that all of the photos in this PowerPoint are mine. So they're either mine that I snapped by myself or ones like this one on the front here that is from one of my camera traps. Can you identify what that is? That is a gray squirrel that's jumping away from the camera. So if you don't know how camera traps work, maybe you just call them trail cameras and then, oh, okay, now I got it. These are the things that hunters and naturalists strap to the trees out in the woods, and they sense when an animal moves in front of them, and they snap a selfie. So this squirrel ran from behind my camera to in front of it, and it just happened to catch it mid jump there. So it's not a flying squirrel, although this animal does not have any of its legs on the ground. You should have already downloaded or pulled out the hard copy that Faust gave you the last day of fish class, the note template that goes along with this. If you have not done that, pause and at the very least have it open in another window next to you here so you can take notes. It really does help if you've got the notes template along with you. Thanks. Okay, let's start by talking about track morphology. Morphology is just the fancy word for the form, studying the form of the track. So we want to look at the track, want to look at all the different parts, get all kinds of clues for it that we possibly can. This is a photo that I took in August of 2011 in Kenya. We were on safari. This was a family vacation, and I spotted these fresh lion tracks, and I wanted to put something down like a penny or a coin of some sort for scale, but our guide would not let me out of the vehicle. And for very good reason, the lions were just a couple hundred yards down the road, and you really need to stay in the vehicles for safety's sake. But you should be able to get an idea of size of these things given the tire track that's right there in the photo. Now you should be able to see both of the tracks in this picture. Let's take a minute to do this. Since I've got all kinds of time and YouTube lets me put any size video I want apparently on its site, let's talk a little bit longer about this than I normally would. So then I don't have to do it with you later. Excuse me. You've got two tracks here. They're both going in the same direction. Can everybody see that this animal is moving to the right? Okay. How about telling me which is the front and which is the rear track here? Well, it turns out, hey, that's not what I wanted. It turns out that this is the front track. I can tell for two reasons. First, look how much bigger it is than the other one. In many of the animals that we study, their front foot is bigger than their back foot. So on the African lion, think about how much weight is in those powerful shoulders and that big head and neck. They carry so much more weight on the front that causes them to have evolved bigger front feet. And those front feet, because they carry so much more weight, do more work. So when I look at these two again, where's my slide? They have a very clear track right here. This is the hind print. The hind print, look how easy it is to see each one of the individual toes and that pad right there. Now let's look at the front track. Look at how these toes are more smudged. They're much more indistinct. And that back pad is a little bit clear, but those front toes are very, very smudged there. That's because that front foot was carrying so much more weight, it did more work. So when they put that foot down and picked it back up again, it really dug into the earth more and created this different kind of a track. I always thought when I was a tracker and not very experienced at this that I'd look at two tracks like this and just say, oh, well, maybe the sand was looser or deeper in that spot. But if you followed this entire set, you would see a clear pattern of a nice crisp track and a smudgy track, a nice crisp track and a smudgy track over and over again as the front and the rear really do different things here. I'm going to take that rear print, the one that is clearer, and I'm going to crop it and I'm going to turn it sideways. So there it is. It's the exact same foot right there. And I'm asking you on your sheet to sketch this track. Of course, if you didn't bother to download this or if you didn't remember to grab the one from Faust, it's a little bit harder to do. Of course, I'm not going to check if you did it or not. But I really think engaging yourself in the work here, even sketching this track, which is a simple task to do, keeps you going with this stuff. So why don't you give it a try? All right, well, if you're not done, pause this and finish up. Let's look at all the different parts of the track and label each of them, and I'll make sure that you've got this understanding for the rest of the semester now. Okay, toes. Of course, you can see the toe prints. Toe beans, I believe they're called on the interwebs now. Fun fact, they get numbered from inner to outer. So an animal's thumb, or yours, would be toe number 1, and your pinky or your small finger would be toe number 5. So if you have a look at this cat track, there's only 4 toes. It is actually the thumb, or the big toe in this case, that's been evolved away. So when we go to number these, because the thumb is missing, we end up with toes 2, 3, 4, and 5. A lot of people just want to start with whatever toe is on the inside, call it number 1. But you can't do that. Number 1 is literally the thumb, so if that's evolved away, if that's gone, there is no toe number 1. And because this is a cat track, it's really easy to tell if this is a right or a left track. Anybody want to take a guess? Anybody want to pause this and go grab their own cat and have a look? Okay. It turns out that cat toes are arranged very much like human fingers without the thumb. So if you take away your thumb, take your left hand, put it up against the screen here, and have a look. Dang it, where's my arrow? So there's your pointer finger. There's your tall finger, right? There's your longest finger, your FU finger. And then you've got your ring finger and then your pinky, arranged just like your fingers are. So telling a right from a left from a cat is very easy. And by the way, this helps you distinguish that this is a cat in the first place. Okay. The pad part, the bottom of the footprint, is technically called in books the metacarpal pad. Now, a lot of books call it the palm pad or the ball of the foot, and I'm okay with either of those. I do want to point something out, though. So if you've got your hand in front of you, did you bring your hand today? The part where your fingers are meeting your hand, the spot where you'd get calluses if maybe you grabbed a baseball bat or a shovel for too long, that's the ball of your hand right there, or the ball of your foot if you want to call it that. To call it the palm pad is really a misnomer because it's not engaging the palm at all. So I do want to point out that it looks like the whole palm of his foot there, but it's really not. It's really just that part. If you flex your hand, you can see that ball, that ridge there where all those calluses form, and that's what we're really looking at. Okay, dude, negative space. Let's talk about this. This is the part of the track where nothing touches. I know it sounds kind of funny, but listen. Look, that ridge right there between the ball of the foot, or the metacarpal pad and the toes, that's all undisturbed sand right there. That's negative space. See the space between these two toes? That's negative space. Space here between these two toes, that's negative space as well. Okay? Sometimes the pattern that the negative space produces is an excellent clue to help identify who made this track. For example, when I look at a cat track, I look at the negative space and it really looks like a pair of brass knuckles to me. I don't know if you had an interesting childhood or not, but brass knuckles are something that you should at least be aware of. And then finally, there's another part to the track called the proximal pad. The proximal pad is the actual heel, the back end of the track. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably looking right here, if you're still paying attention to me and not multitasking. Hey, watch this. Right here, this is the back of the track, but it is not the back of the foot. So this doesn't count as the heel. This is just the back part of the metacarpal pad. The heel is not present in this track. Well, let's have a look at an actual lion's foot. So I've got a lion laying down here. This is still Kenya, still 2011, just a different park here. And I'm not looking at a hind anymore. I'm looking at a front. And the way I know I'm looking at a front is, if you've got a cat, go call it over. I'm sure it'll come, right? Cats are very good at that. Have a look at your cat. Your cat actually has 5 toes on the front foot. That one that sits up higher, it's smaller. Some people call it a dew claw. It still does have a nail on it. It's not a weight-bearing toe, so it doesn't show up in the track. Almost never. I guess if the snow was deep enough, it would. Snow's rarely deep enough in Kenya, by the way. So that fifth toe signifies to me that I'm looking at a front, and that since that's the thumb, I know I'm looking at a left. Here is the right arm crossed over it. And then check it out. Your cat has this, your dog's got this also. This little creepy looking ball of callous flesh that's on the foot there, that's actually its heel. And the heel really only gets engaged when the animal's in four-wheel drive. So think about deep snow, think about mud, think about when it needs extra sort of traction. That's a very rare sighting, for me at least. A cat or a dog track, a canine or a feline, I should say, not just specifically talk about domestics, that has that proximal pad, that heel pad that actually shows there. But there it is. And all of that space in between, if I were to actually see that, between here and here, if this had engaged in the ground, this would all be called negative space. Okay, y'all good? Y'all got the parts? Great. When we talk about hooves, I got one or two extra parts that I got to teach you, but for now that'll be good. You know, once you learn how to identify a cat track, you can identify cat tracks all over the world. Also in 2011, I went to Montana actually for a mountain lion track workshop in February, and those mountain lion tracks that I took in the snow in Montana looked very much the same as the African lion tracks that I took in August in Kenya, just size difference mostly. All right. One of my favorite pictures that I took in all of our trip to Africa that year. So one of the reasons why this is a favorite picture is because of the story that goes along with this. Here is another picture of the same scene where the lioness had just stolen this porcupine from the hyenas and is walking away with it. And she knows they're following, so she's listening. So if I go back to that slide, check it out. You can see her ears are pointed backwards. And so she's actually listening behind her for these guys, making sure they're not getting too close. So they did all the work. They dug out that porcupine. African porcupines live underground, and she was able to steal it. But what I want you to look at is her hind foot. So for the purposes of today's video, we're looking at the back foot here, and I want you to tell me, the one that's raised up, when I get to the heel. So let me activate my cursor again. Yep, that's not what I wanted to do. There's the toes, right? And then stop me when I get to the heel. Yeah, don't stop me here because I already told you. The end of the pad there isn't the end of the heel. You got it. That heel is way up here. So if you look at a cat's foot, they only walk on their toes and the ball of their foot. The sole of their foot and their heel is almost always up off the ground. And you can see that it's fully furred. It's not meant to be put on the ground there. We call these kinds of animals digitigrade. Digitigrade means they walk on their digits. They walk on their toe and the ball of their foot. Two examples that I've been using over and over again are the dogs and the cats. And this is an adaptation for running. So a cool vocabulary word for running is cursorial, and that's what you got here. All good? You have time to write all this down? Okay. Let's take a look at this picture. This came from my hedgerow here in Seneca Falls from a camera trap. What's the species? Yes, coyote is correct. This is a nice fall picture. You can see some of the leaves in the front there are starting to turn red. This is probably a late October, early November photo here. So what I want you to do is look at the back leg, and I want you to find this animal's knee. Did you find the knee? Are you looking at this? Because that's not a knee, that's an ankle. Ankles bend in this direction. Knees bend forward. This is the animal's knee right here. Let's start at the top. The hip, the knee, the ankle, and then that's the foot. A coyote's hind foot starts here and goes all the way down to below the leaf litter here. Its footprint is just a small portion of that. Let's start from the bottom and work our way, gosh darn it, and work our way up. Here's the toes, the ankle, the knee, and the hip. We can do it on the front as well, shoulder, elbow, wrist. If anybody's ever looked at their dog and wondered why their knees bend backwards, well, you're not looking at their knees. Wolf, the larger cousin for the coyote. I took this picture in 2011. I took a wolf tracking workshop, and we had some amazing experiences on there. And one of them, a pair of wolves actually killed an elk very close to our campsite in the middle of the night. Woke us all up, and we found their fresh tracks in the morning. So I'm hoping you can see the actual toes here. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4 toes. And then here's that, I'm not going to make you memorize it just yet, but here's that metacarpal pad, that ball of the foot there. And then now I want you to look at the negative space, the space between the toes. Do you see what looks like a starfish? Is everybody seeing Patrick? Am I the only one? You see that? And it really does raise up. This part right here where my cursor is, that is so high. It's just prominent pyramid of sand that's left undisturbed. So dog tracks and cat tracks are very, very different. You should be able to tell them apart. You notice I didn't mention anything about claws. When we talk about mountain lions later, I'll talk about all this craziness of people that think they've seen mountain lions in New York, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Okay, to take digitigrade to an extreme, you would just walk on the tips of your toes, and that's what unguligrades do. Unguligrades, or ungulates, walk on just the tips of their toes. Look at your hands again. Look at those fingernails that you have. Imagine those fingernails were just thicker, went a little bit farther around your fingers. Hell, those would be hooves. So deer and pigs are just two examples of unguligrades, and these are also adapted for running. Now this next picture I'm going to show you is also from my property here in Seneca Falls, and it's a buck, it's a male deer, and I don't want you to get jealous, but this is the quality of bucks that I have access to when I hunt on my property. Yeah, that's great. I didn't even see him this year. Look, we're not really focusing on the antlers right now, we're looking at the feet. And I use this picture because it's absolutely perfect. You can see that his front foot is just lifting off the ground, and that his rear foot is just landing in the spot where that front foot left. There's a fancy word for this. We call it direct registering. The hind foot registers directly on top of where the front foot was, so that if you were following his tracks in the snow or in the mud, it would look like you're following a two-legged animal because you're only seeing rears. The fronts are underneath the rears. So it's just kind of a cool little side jaunt there. But again, let's have a look at where that ankle is and how small the footprint is. These things are just walking on their tippy toes. And they're not even walking on all their toes, are they? Most of the time, they only walk on their two longest toes. The two shorter toes, the dew claws, are usually much higher up and not really engaged in here. If you've got that friend that knows everything about white-tailed deer and drives you crazy, just ask him a quick question. Just ask him, and it's always a him, by the way. Ask him, how big is a deer's hind foot? And if they answer something like 1 or 2 inches or put their fingers apart about the size of that, then you can just smile knowing that it's about 18 inches is really the length of a deer's hind foot. They just use a very tiny bit of it to actually do any locomotion. I told you guys that I took students to South Africa in August, and I set out some camera traps there. Here's a giraffe that walked past the camera. You can see it's the exact same thing for the giraffe. He's walking on just the tips of his toes here. The ankles are way high up. The wrist is way high up. That's that front joint that's there. I think that's a cool picture. And he was the biggest unguligrade that we had in South Africa. We had an animal called a diker, which is very similar to this unfortunately named dik-dik that I saw here in Kenya. Dik-diks are just tiny. They're about the size of fawns, but they're full grown. That's the size, and I think they get named because as they walk around, they make little dick noises with their hooves. Both of these guys are unguligrades, just opposite ends of the size extreme. And as a tracker, here is one of my favorite pictures that I took in South Africa last summer. Just got to take a minute to take this all in. You can see the 6-inch ruler down here at the bottom. And here is a giraffe track. Look at that thing. There's the ridge in the middle. And here's the one side of the hoof, and here's the other side of the hoof. And who stepped inside of it? But that smallest of them, the duiker. So I've got two pictures. One picture with two footprints. The biggest hoofed animal, the giraffe, and the smallest hoofed animal, the duiker, both in one photo. Okay, we have one last way that mammals put their feet on the ground, and that's plantigrade. Plantigrade animals walk on their whole foot, including their soles. And it turns out that plantigrade is named after the sole of your foot. Your sole is your plantar region. Two good examples of that are bears and humans, and we are built for walking. We're built to be ambulatory, not cursorial. I'm not saying that humans can't run. I'm just saying that's not what we're built for. Here's a picture of some bear tracks that I took when I was in Idaho, and man, that one just looks like a human foot, doesn't it? Here's a better one in North Carolina just last summer. And if we have a look at this guy, you can see here's his instep or his arch. There's the metacarpal pad. There's the heel pad. And then here's all of the toes. Black bears look like they have their toes on backwards. Their biggest toe is not on the inside, it's on the outside. Their littlest toe, the thumb in this case is their littlest toe, is on the inside. You can see where the arch is. You know your arch is on your inside of your foot, but their toes just look like somebody put them on backwards. Another good example of a plantigrade animal would be a raccoon. I'd like you to look at these two photos from a camera trap in a different spot on my property. Here's a raccoon at 4:29 in the morning, and you can see that hind foot. You get the idea that it's plantigrade by how big and long it is. But here he is on the way back after walking through my swamp, and he has a completely wet back end from walking in the water there, and you can see his two hind feet both raised up in the same exact pattern that that female lion had, but now you can see that the heel to the toes is all naked. That is a foot that's meant to be walked on. No fur on it, so we know it's designed to be used. Cool. I have a blog that I introduced to you guys in the very first PowerPoint, and you have some readings to do from it. I did have an entry here about raccoon tracks that I thought would be interesting for you guys to have a look at. So the blog again is listed as Backyard Beasts. And one thing that I'm going to do here, instead of actually reading this whole blog entry with you, is just click on a photo. Just click on a photo. Where are you going there, boy? Okay. And we can just look at these, and I'll paraphrase what's in the blog entry. So I was getting some raccoons that were coming to visit my pond in my backyard. I set up a camera trap, and I was getting pictures of them. You can see maybe that this is a young raccoon. And as the summer progressed, they got a little bit bigger, but they stayed together as a family unit. Can you see all four of the raccoons here? And a cool thing about raccoons is they move the 2 feet on the same side of the body often at the same time. So if you look at this raccoon right here, you can see his right front and his right hind are both up in the air like this because he's moving them both backwards while he's moving these other ones forward here. And that proved out in their tracks in the mud as well. Here's a hind track, and if I look at it, you can see the big heel of that plantigrade foot and the toes. And here's a front track, and you can see that their front foot, like ours is much smaller. Now I told you with the lion and the dog tracks that's different, that in some animals their front foot is bigger than their back foot, but in raccoons and black bears and humans the back foot is bigger than the front. And then I looked at this exact picture right here, and I'm looking at how this hind foot is at the same distance as this front foot on this side. And I'd remembered taking a picture in the winter of two raccoons walking side by side here. And that's how raccoon tracks almost always fall, with a hind print next to a front and then a front track next to a hind. So they've got that alternating pattern there that really makes raccoons easy to tell, even at a distance. But I went to this whole trouble because I really wanted to show you this picture right here. So I had a camera out in Florida. I went to Florida and gave a presentation at a conference one time, and I brought a camera with me and just set it in the drainage ditch across from the place that I was staying. And a couple things about this raccoon. First of all, let's all agree that this is a male. Secondly, let's have a look at the feet here. Now, I told you that they're plantigrade. So when I first looked at this picture, I was focusing on this back foot right here, and I see how high up it is. And I thought to myself that I just caught this animal just as it was lifting its foot up off of the ground, and that's why I saw it that way. And I don't know how long it took before I finally looked at this other foot over here, and I noticed that only the front part of the foot was wet. I'm not looking at an animal that's just lifted his foot off of the ground. I'm looking at a plantigrade animal that's walking like it's digitigrade. It's walking up on his tippy toes. So all these guys could fool you. It's a lot easier if you are plantigrade to watch digitigrade than doing the opposite. Imagine your dog walking around on those big back legs. That would be ridiculous. But I just wanted to warn you that any plantigrade animal could go digitigrade. I took this picture in Belize many years ago, long before Guardians of the Galaxy was even a thing in my world. The more I look at this picture, I'm not quite sure who's in charge here. Okay, stole this drawing off of the internet. I think it's a great one, and it really does a good job of explaining everything to you. The only thing is it's not to scale. That is not a gigantic squirrel there. So a plantigrade animal has its heel on the ground. A digitigrade animal has the ball of its foot and its toes on the ground. And an unguligrade animal only has the tips of its toes on the ground. Quick story for you. I used to teach this class talking about plantigrade animals first. Because when I went to teacher school, they teach you that you're supposed to start what's familiar with people and then talk about what's strange. And plantigrade should be familiar to all of you since you're all plantigrade, except for that one kid in elementary school that walked on his tippy toes. Do you know who I'm talking about? You do, of course. Everybody had one of those kids in elementary school. But interestingly, only one of them. But I would start out this PowerPoint and imagine the PowerPoint. The first slide would be something like animal that walks on his whole foot. And the students would look at me like I was an idiot. Like, of course animals walk on their feet. But you now know that not all animals walk on their whole foot. So I had to start with what's unfamiliar, because when I started with plantigrade, people just lost respect for me immediately because I sounded like an idiot telling them that animals walked on their feet. You know, there's other ways that animals get around, mammals, I should say, and I'd like to go through some of those vocabulary words with you right now so that I am free to use them in future PowerPoints. So I've got scansorial written down there. A scansorial animal is adapted to climb with sharp claws. I've got a picture of a gray squirrel here as a good example of that. Gray squirrels, porcupines, black bears, all are great climbers with sharp claws. Do you know who else is a great climber? Monkeys. But they don't do it with sharp claws, so they're not scansorial. Do you know who else is a great climber? Bighorn sheep. But they're doing it with hooves up a rock face and not doing it with sharp claws. So scansorial only applies to sharp-clawed climbers. And I do want to also point out that there's a related term here, which is arboreal, which is any animal that lives in trees. So you could probably say that a gray squirrel spends most of his time arboreal, most of his time in the trees. And he got there by being scansorial, unlike the birds that probably did not climb the trunk. Let's go in the opposite direction, fossorial. I took this picture of this pocket gopher in Yellowstone National Park. Super excited to see one out during the day. I've only seen two out during the day in my life. And he is adapted to digging and living underground with those big sharp claws that you can see. So pocket gopher, moles, badgers, all fossorial animals. A woodchuck is also fossorial. Cool. And then here's a pair of terms. So if you've got the sheet in front of you, you can see that the next term after aquatic is semi-aquatic. It's a pet peeve of mine. Aquatic means you live entirely in the water. And we've got several mammals that do that. All the whales, all the dolphins, manatees do it, womanatees do it. Basically, the definition works like this. If you're on land and you're in trouble, that makes you aquatic. If you're on land and not in trouble, then you're not aquatic. A seal or a sea lion isn't aquatic, they're semi-aquatic because they're adapted to live in the water, but they also can live on land. Our upstate examples here would be beaver, muskrat, river otter, mink. Could probably add a couple more in there. But those four I mentioned because those are the focus of a class that's taught in the fall at our Mueller Field Station called Wetland Mammals. You can take it as a conservation elective for most of our electives. And they have very similar adaptations, and all four of them are found at our Mueller Field Station. And we either get camera trap pictures of them or see them live. It's a great class to take. If it's something you're interested in, I can talk more about it to you and explain what that's all about. Beaver in the picture here. I took this picture when my wife and I were canoeing a couple springs ago in the flooded forest. And then our last two vocabulary words also go together. Volant is the term for gliding. And I probably wouldn't have to mention all this if somebody had not misnamed flying squirrels. Flying squirrels are really just gliding squirrels. And I'm not saying it's not cool. It's way better than what I can do. But flying squirrels don't actually fly, they glide. Sugar gliders are probably also misnamed. I bet they don't taste very sugary. Here's an example of a flying squirrel that we caught at field camp in a live trap. We let him go. He climbed up this tree a little bit, and then while he was getting his bearings, he just sat there and let me get a couple pictures of him. And I've always wanted to get a picture of a flying squirrel actually gliding, going from tree to tree. And in 2015, I was able to do that. Now, if you're squinting at the camera right now, I understand. If you're on your laptop, there it is. There's my bat signal. That's the flying squirrel. And I was proud of this picture. It was better than nothing. Hell, it's probably better than every flying squirrel picture that you have, right? So I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but it's wasn't going to be the cover of National Geographic, but I was happy. Until we went to Borneo that summer. Borneo is in Southeast Asia, and they have about half a dozen species of flying squirrels. It was amazing, and they're huge. This one is actually bigger than a gray squirrel. So after numerous failed attempts at photographs for these guys, we happened to be out one evening, and we were looking for bats, actually, and it was getting darker and darker, and we watched this flying squirrel climb up to this tree, and the only question was going to be is which direction was he going to fly? We're right out in the middle of this opening in the forest, and man, I was really hoping he was going to come towards me. And he went from this posture to this one. And this is what my daughter always called locked and loaded, because every time these guys would jump, they would prep themselves first. They'd get their tail up, they'd shift their weight, and off he launches himself. And doesn't he jump right over the top of us? And I was able to get this picture. Okay, a couple of things about this. First off, these are called giant flying squirrels. This is the red giant flying squirrels, and these were huge. I can't remember the exact dimensions of this guy, but bigger than a sheet of paper. Second, again, obviously a male here. He's got a little carry-on luggage there. Third, have a look at the two eyes in this picture. It was so dark I had to use a flash to get this picture, so that's a little glow off of his eyes there. And look at how that membrane is stretched out from his neck to his wrist, from his wrist to his ankle, from the ankle to the tail. This is a huge sail that he's got here, but not flying, sailing. These are the only animals that fly, bats. All of our bats fly, and only bats fly. I know birds fly and insects fly, but when it comes to mammals, bats are the only flyers. I don't know if any of you guys had Clinton Krager for biology. He's in two, count them two, 1, 2, 2 of my videos. If you've had Krager, you know what the heck I'm talking about here. He and I were catching bats one time on campus and got a couple pictures here. So Ariel not only is my favorite mermaid, but it is also the word for true flight. Okay, that takes us to the end of this lecture. If you want to, power through another one or two if you've got the time today. If not, give yourself a little bit of a break. But eventually you'll have to get through all of these guys. Thanks, everybody.